This is for a video for some of you that have been absent when we are just learning this very important formula, this quadratic formula. And what it's doing, we are still solving our quadratics, where we have the ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Well, this is the third and final method that we're going to be learning this year in Algebra 1. Our first method was by factoring, and that's what we've been working on for a while, so factoring. Second method has been completing the square. And the third and final method that we're going to do this year is using the quadratic formula to solve for our roots or our zeros, where when we start graphing this, you'll see that that square is going to be crossing the x-axis. And so, or the quadratic formula. So that's what we're going to work on today. The first thing I want you to do is definitely go back to the Google Classroom and watch the very catchy video that a student made, not one of my students, but another student somewhere else made it. It's to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. And I would definitely watch it 4, 5, 6, 20 times, and you will have the quadratic formulas memorized. And it's kind of catchy, and the kids are really getting it. But the quadratic formula is this, to where, and there's like 12 steps between here and getting to it, but we'll prove it maybe another time. Or when you get to Algebra 2, they'll make you prove it. But this is the quadratic formula. So x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That is going to be probably one of the most useful formulas as you get into higher math, Algebra 2 for sure, your trig, your calculus, and all that. So this is going to be one of those formulas you'll definitely want to have memorized. They'll probably give it to you definitely on the EOCs. But watch that tune, or watch that video. You'll have that catchy tune. Okay, so I'm going to give you in quadratic. So we have x squared minus 3x minus 40 equals 0. Now, we can solve this by factoring, which is probably going to be a little faster with the factoring. We could probably solve it completing the square, or we could solve it with the quadratic formula. For this purpose, we're going to teach you how to use the quadratic formula to solve for this. Okay? So first of all, notice the A, B, and C letters. So we got to identify the A term, the B term, and the C term. So our A term, a lot of times I write this off to the side, A term is 1. B term, be careful of your negative, because it's a negative 3, and your C term is a negative 40. So be careful with these negatives. Don't drop those. That's where some people make errors. Okay, now we have the opposite of B, so we're going to have x equals the opposite of B. What I like to do is I like to plug in everything first. So this is the opposite of a negative 3, plus or minus the square root. Now B squared, negative 3, make sure that's in parentheses, negative 3 squared, minus 4 times the A term, which is 1, times the C term, which is negative 40, make sure the square root's all the way over it, all over 2 times 1. Your first, after you identify the A, B, and C term, your first goal then is to plug in all the information, then start simplifying. Okay? Now, if you have more room, you can go this way, or you can bring it down. Just be careful of all your signs. So the opposite of negative 3 is 3, plus or minus the square root. Negative 3 squared is 9. Now watch this. So you have a negative 4 times 1 times a negative 40. These are both negative. So it's be plus 4 times 40 is 160, all over 2. And I sometimes will go this way if I have a little bit more room. Or you can bring it down. Now you still have 3 plus or minus. Actually, I'm going to erase that. Sorry. I'm going to go ahead and do it this way. 3 is plus or minus. Now, 9 plus 160 is square root of 169 over 2. Now, we can simplify this. The square root is 169. 169 is a perfect square. Many of you have the yellow sheet, the perfect square sheet that I gave you. Refer to that. If that's a perfect square, that will then be 3 plus or minus 13 over 2. Now here's where this plus or minus is going to change split into two equations. So you can have 3 plus 13 divided by 2, or 3 minus 13 divided by 2. So you have 3 plus 13 is 16 divided by 2, which is 8. Or 3 minus 13 is a negative 10 divided by 2, or is a negative 5. So our two zeros, x, I should be in that circle, is going to be 8 or a negative 5. So if we want to put it back in and check it, then that 8 squared is 64, minus 24, minus 40 should be 0. Negative 5 squared is 25, plus 15 minus 40, yep, that's going to be 40 minus 0 is 0. So these two are our roots. Okay, so let's do another one. I'll probably need to do it on this piece of paper. And I'll make a copy of this to shoot it for the ones who've been absent. I don't know, let's just pick, let's just pick this one. X squared plus 8x minus 20 equals 0. Okay, identify, we're going to use the quadratic formula. Identify your A, your B, and your C. Sorry, it's lunchtime, so people are walking through. Okay, I always like to write down the quadratic formula first until you have it memorized. The more you write it down, the more you memorize it. And actually listen to that tune and that'll help you. All right, so the opposite. Now I'm not going to put parentheses here because this 8 is positive. So I'm going to say the opposite of 8, plus or minus 8 squared. Now you can do parentheses or no parentheses. It's just when it's negative, you have to have parentheses. So if you want to get in the habit of doing that, that's fine. 4 times 1 times a negative 20. Make sure it's a negative 20. All over 2 times 1. Your first term is not always going to be 1. Your A term is not always going to be 1. So just know that. Okay. So we have negative 8 plus or minus square root of 60, or 8 squared is 64, plus 4 times 20 is 80, all over 2, negative 8, plus or minus 64 plus 80 is 144 over 2. Now I will give you a tip. The paper that I'm going to scan in, this one, they will all, when you get to this point, this should all be a perfect square. So just know that if you're not getting a perfect square here for this paper that I'm going to scan in, then something's probably not right, like your signs. You got to watch that. All right, so now we have negative 8 plus or minus 12 divided by 2. This is where now you split this to two equations. You have negative 8 plus 12 divided by 2, or negative 8 minus 12 divided by 2. So negative 8 plus 12 is 4 divided by 2, which is going to be 2. Or negative 8 minus 12 is negative 20 divided by 2 is a negative 10. So your x in this situation, your roots are 2 and negative 10. Okay, now I will scan in the problems for the Google Classroom, and then you can do this. This is a tic-tac-toe board game that we tic-tac-toe board. Anyway, tic-tac-toe board that you can pick these, and I don't know, I'd probably practice 6 or 7 of them. Maybe some of these that are a little larger, you could factor out, pull out a GCF. That might make that a little easier there. But anyway, so practice that as you have been absent.